The massive python's coils tightened like steel cables around the screaming German shepherd, crushing the life out of the decorated military canine. The handler, a decorated Delta Force operator, had exactly 90 seconds before his partner's ribs would snap and his lungs would collapse. This was a suburban park in North Carolina on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and the 20-foot Burmese python that shouldn't even exist in this state had already killed 2 dogs that week. What happened in the next 2 minutes would expose an illegal exotic animal smuggling ring so vast, so dangerous, that it reached from the cartels of Southeast Asia to the mansions of America's wealthiest collectors. And the handler was about to go to war on American soil to burn it all down. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The morning sun hung low over Riverside Park in Fayetteville, North Carolina, painting the world in shades of gold and amber that made everything look softer than it really was. It was 7:43 a.m. on a Saturday in late September, that perfect slice of autumn when the heat of summer had finally broken, but winter's bite hadn't yet arrived. The air smelled clean, like freshly cut grass and pine needles, with just a hint of the Cape Fear River that wound its way through the city a few miles east. Jake Morrison sat on a weathered wooden bench near the main trail, a large travel mug of black coffee in his hand, watching the world wake up around him. He was 36 years old, though some days he felt twice that. He had the kind of face that photographers would call rugged, all sharp angles and hard lines, with a strong jaw that he hadn't bothered to shave in 3 days, and eyes the color of storm clouds that had seen things most people couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. He was 6'1", with broad shoulders and the lean, functional build of someone whose body was a tool, not a decoration. His dark brown hair was still cut military short, a habit he couldn't seem to break, even though he'd been out of active duty for 8 months now. He wore his old tactical uniform, the same olive green and tan digital camouflage pattern he'd worn on countless missions. Tactical long-sleeve shirt, cargo pants with reinforced knees, tan military combat boots that were broken in perfectly. He told himself it was practical, that the pockets were useful, that the boots had good support. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. Some mornings, 8 months after retiring, civilian clothes still felt like a lie. The uniform was honest. It was who he'd been, who he maybe still was. Everything about the way he held himself screamed discipline, control, purpose. Even sitting still, Jake Morrison looked like a man ready to move. Beside him, lying in a perfect down position with his head resting on his massive paws, was Ranger. Ranger was a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 75 pounds of pure muscle and loyalty, wrapped in a coat of rich fawn and black. His ears stood at permanent attention, swiveling independently like radar dishes, tracking every sound in the park. His dark eyes, intelligent and watchful, missed nothing. A jogger passing 50 yards away, a squirrel climbing an oak tree, a car door closing in the parking lot behind them. He wasn't just a dog. He was a warrior who happened to walk on 4 legs. Ranger had served 3 tours with Jake in Afghanistan and 1 in Syria. He was a multi-purpose canine, trained in explosives detection, patrol work, and attack. He'd found 17 IEDs that would have killed American soldiers. He'd taken down 3 insurgents who'd gotten too close to Jake's unit during a nighttime raid in Kandahar. He'd been shot once, in the shoulder, and had kept working until the mission was complete before collapsing. The U.S. Army had decorated Ranger twice. Once for saving Jake's life, when he'd alerted to a pressure plate IED that Jake had been about to step on. Once for locating a weapons cache that led to the arrest of a high-value target who'd been planning an attack on a forward operating base. When Jake had retired from Delta Force 8 months ago, the first thing he'd done was adopt Ranger. The military usually kept working dogs in service until they were too old or injured to continue, then placed them with their handlers if possible. Jake had called in every favor he had to make sure Ranger came home with him. Because the truth was, Ranger had saved Jake's life more times than the official record showed. And not just in combat. After Jake had come home, after the nightmares had started, after the days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, Ranger had been there, silent, patient, a warm body that demanded nothing but gave everything. Jake took a sip of his coffee and looked down at his partner. "You ready, boy?" Ranger's tail thumped once against the ground. His eyes shifted to Jake's face, waiting for the command. "All right," Jake said, standing up. "Let's walk." Ranger was on his feet instantly, moving to Jake's left side in a perfect heel position. Even retired, even in civilian life, the training never left. They'd been coming to Riverside Park every morning for the past 3 months, part of Jake's routine to build some kind of normal life. Wake up at 0600. Coffee. Park. Then back home to his small rental house where he'd spend the day doing whatever odd jobs he could find, trying to figure out what a Delta Force operator did when he wasn't operating anymore. It wasn't going great, if he was honest. The park was starting to fill up with the usual Saturday morning crowd, young mothers pushing strollers, elderly couples walking arm in arm, teenagers throwing a football, a yoga class setting up on the lawn near the pavilion. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that men like Jake had spent years in the darkest corners of the world, making sure they could do exactly that. Jake and Ranger followed the main trail that looped around the park's perimeter, a 2-mile circuit through trees and open spaces. Ranger walked perfectly beside him, occasionally glancing up as if to check that Jake was still there, still okay. "Good boy," Jake murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Ranger's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, just for a moment, before returning to his alert posture. They were about half a mile into their walk, in a section of the trail that curved through a dense cluster of pine trees, when Ranger stopped. It wasn't a casual stop. It was instant, total, his entire body going rigid. His ears pinned forward, his nose lifted, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. It was the same sound he'd made in Helmand Province when he'd detected explosives, when he'd sensed danger that Jake's human senses couldn't perceive. Jake's hand instinctively went to his hip, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. He forced himself to breathe, to assess. They were in a public park in North Carolina, not a combat zone. But Ranger didn't make mistakes. If he was alerting, there was a reason. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked quietly, his eyes scanning the tree line. "What do you smell?" Ranger took 3 steps forward, pulling against his leash for the first time in months. His growl deepened, his hackles raised, the fur along his spine standing up in a ridge. That's when Jake heard it. A sound that didn't belong in a North Carolina park. A sound that made his blood run cold even though he couldn't immediately identify why. A hissing, low, sustained, coming from the underbrush about 20 feet off the trail. And then he saw it. The snake was massive, impossibly massive. Its body was as thick as Jake's thigh, covered in brown and tan scales that formed an intricate pattern of irregular shapes. It was coiled in the shadow of a fallen log, partially hidden by ferns and dead leaves, but Jake could see at least 10 feet of its length, which meant there was more he couldn't see. His mind, trained to identify threats in milliseconds, processed the information. Burmese python, non-native species. Shouldn't be in North Carolina. Definitely shouldn't be this far north. His eyes tracked the snake's head, triangular and alert, its black eyes fixed not on Jake but on Ranger. "Ranger, heel!" Jake commanded, his voice sharp and clear. He started to back away, pulling gently on the leash. "Come on, boy. We're leaving. Now." But Ranger wasn't moving. The dog's entire focus was locked on the snake. Every muscle in his body coiled and ready. He'd faced down armed insurgents without flinching, but there was something about this threat, this ancient predator-prey dynamic coded into his DNA, that overrode even his training. The python moved. It was so fast that Jake almost didn't see it happen. 1 second it was coiled in the underbrush. The next, it was launching itself forward like a missile, its mouth open impossibly wide, its body uncoiling with terrifying speed and power. "Ranger, no!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. The python struck Ranger in the side, its mouth clamping onto the dog's rib cage. Ranger yelped, a sound of shock and pain, and tried to twist away, but the snake was already wrapping around him. Its body, all 15 feet of it that Jake could now see, began to coil around Ranger's torso and legs with methodical, horrifying efficiency. Jake dropped his coffee and lunged forward, his combat training taking over before conscious thought could catch up. He grabbed the python's body with both hands, trying to unwrap it, but it was like trying to bend steel cable. The muscles beneath those scales were impossibly strong, contracting with hydraulic force, and he could already see Ranger's ribcage being compressed. The dog was fighting, thrashing, trying to bite the snake's head, but every movement just made the coils tighten more. The python's strategy was simple and brutally effective. Squeeze, wait, squeeze tighter. Wait for the prey to exhaust itself, to stop breathing, to die. Jake's mind raced through options. He couldn't unwrap it. The snake was too strong, its coils overlapping, each loop reinforcing the others. Ranger had maybe 90 seconds before his ribs would start to crack, maybe 2 minutes before he suffocated. He needed a weapon. A knife. Something. His hand went to his pocket, finding his folding knife, a Benchmade he'd carried for 10 years. He flicked it open with his thumb, the 3-inch blade locking into place with a solid click. "I'm sorry," he muttered, not sure if he was talking to the snake or to himself, or to whatever nature god he was about to offend. He drove the knife into the python's body, about 3 feet from its head, aiming for the spine. The blade punched through scales and muscle, and he twisted it, trying to sever the spinal cord. The snake hissed, a sound like escaping steam, and its coils spasmed but didn't release. Ranger was making choking sounds now, his eyes wide with panic and pain. Jake pulled the knife out and stabbed again, higher this time, closer to the head. Blood, dark and thick, began to flow from the wounds. The python's movements became more erratic, more desperate, but its coils were still crushing the life out of Ranger. A woman was screaming somewhere behind him. Jake was dimly aware of other people, park visitors who'd heard the commotion, but he couldn't focus on them. His entire world had narrowed to this fight, to his partner who was dying in front of him. He dropped the knife and grabbed the python's head with both hands, his fingers digging into the scales behind its jaw. It was the most dangerous part of the snake, the business end, but he was out of options. He pulled, using every ounce of his strength, trying to force the snake's mouth open, trying to make it let go of Ranger. The python's body thrashed, slamming into Jake's legs and chest, but he held on. His tactical sleeves were soaked through, the camouflage pattern now darkened with blood and dirt as he fought. His hands were covered in blood, his own and the snake's, making it hard to grip. But he'd been trained to fight through pain, through exhaustion, through situations that would make most people shut down. He roared, a primal sound of rage and desperation, and pulled harder. Something gave. He felt the snake's jaw dislocate under his hands, felt its muscles go slack for just a second, and in that second he yanked Ranger free. The dog collapsed onto the ground, gasping, his sides heaving. The python, grievously wounded but still alive, began to retreat, dragging its bleeding body back into the underbrush with surprising speed. Jake let it go. He didn't care about the snake anymore. He dropped to his knees beside Ranger, his hands hovering over the dog's body, not sure where to touch, where it was safe. Ranger, hey buddy, look at me. Look at me. Ranger's eyes found his. The dog tried to lift his head but couldn't. His breathing was shallow, rapid, wrong. Jake could see the indentations in the dog's fur where the coils had compressed, could see the way Ranger's ribcage wasn't moving symmetrically. Broken ribs. Definitely. Possibly punctured lung, internal bleeding. Shock. Jake's training kicked in again, this time the combat medical training that every Delta operator received. He ran his hands over Ranger's body, checking for injuries, assessing. The dog whimpered, a sound that broke Jake's heart. I know, boy. I know it hurts. But you're gonna be okay. You hear me? You're gonna be okay. He didn't believe it, but he said it anyway, because that's what you did. You lied to your wounded brothers and told them they'd make it, even when you knew they wouldn't, because hope was sometimes the only medicine you had. Someone was beside him now, a man in running clothes, his face pale. Oh my God. What happened? Is your dog okay? Call 911. Jake said without looking at him. Tell them we need an emergency vet. Now. I don't think 911 handles. Just do it! Jake snapped, and the man scrambled backward, pulling out his phone. Jake gently, carefully, slid his arms under Ranger's body. The dog whimpered again, but didn't struggle. Jake stood, cradling his 75-pound partner like a child, and started walking toward the parking lot. He didn't run. Running would jostle Ranger, make the pain worse, maybe drive a broken rib into something vital. But he walked fast. His truck was parked near the entrance, a beat-up Ford F-150 that had seen better days. He managed to open the passenger door with one hand while holding Ranger with the other, a feat of desperate strength, and laid the dog on the bench seat. Ranger's breathing was getting worse, more labored. His gums, when Jake pulled back his lip to check, were pale. Shock setting in. Jake ran around to the driver's side, jumped in, and started the engine. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline and terror finally catching up to him. He pulled out his phone, searching for the nearest emergency vet. Fayetteville Animal Emergency Clinic. 2.4 miles, 7 minutes. He made it in 4. He drove like he was back in Iraq, running a convoy through hostile territory, ignoring red lights and speed limits and the angry honks of other drivers. His only mission was getting Ranger to help. Nothing else mattered. The clinic was a low, modern building with a red emergency sign out front. Jake slammed the truck into park, ran around to get Ranger, and kicked open the clinic's front door, hard enough to make it slam against the wall. "I need help!" he shouted into the waiting room. "My dog was attacked. He's not breathing right." A woman in scrubs appeared immediately, her eyes going wide when she saw Ranger in Jake's arms. "Exam room 2 now. What happened?" "Python attack," Jake said, following her down a hallway at a run. Constriction injury, possible broken ribs, internal bleeding. The woman, whose name tag read Dr. Sarah Chen, didn't waste time asking how a python attack had happened in North Carolina. She directed Jake to lay Ranger on a stainless steel examination table and immediately began her assessment, her hands moving with practiced efficiency over the dog's body. "I need oxygen, IV fluids, and get radiology ready for chest X-rays," she called out to a vet tech who'd appeared in the doorway. "Also prep for possible thoracentesis if we've got a pneumothorax." The medical jargon washed over Jake, but he understood enough. Pneumothorax, collapsed lung. His worst fear confirmed. Dr. Chen looked up at him, her dark eyes serious but kind. "You need to step back and let us work. We've got him." "I'm not leaving," Jake said flatly. "I didn't ask you to leave. I asked you to step back. There." She pointed to the corner of the room. "Stand there, stay quiet, and let me save your dog." There was something in her voice, an authority that reminded Jake of the battlefield surgeons he'd worked with, the ones who'd saved his men's lives with steady hands and steely nerves. He nodded and moved to the corner. For the next 20 minutes, he watched Dr. Sarah Chen fight for Ranger's life. She was incredible. Her movements were precise, economical, no wasted motion. She intubated Ranger to help him breathe. She started an IV line, pushing fluids and pain medication. She ran her hands over every inch of the dog's body, calling out findings to the tech who was taking notes. 3 fractured ribs on the right side, significant bruising along the thorax and abdomen, decreased lung sounds on the right. "Get me those X-rays now." The X-rays were done with a portable machine, the images appearing on a computer screen mounted on the wall. Dr. Chen studied them, her brow furrowed. "Moderate pneumothorax, but the lung hasn't completely collapsed. No obvious internal bleeding that I can see, but we'll need an ultrasound to be sure." She looked at Jake. "He's stable for now, but he's not out of the woods. The next 12 hours are critical. I want to keep him here, monitor him closely, possibly do surgery if the lung doesn't re-inflate on its own." Jake's legs felt weak. He leaned against the wall, suddenly aware that his hands and clothes were covered in blood. Is he going to make it? Dr. Chen's expression softened. "I don't make promises I can't keep, but I'll tell you this, he's strong, he's fighting, and he's in the right place. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I'm very good at my job. So yes, I think he's going to make it." Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The adrenaline was draining out of him, leaving behind exhaustion and the kind of shaking that came after combat, when your body finally admitted it had been terrified. Dr. Chen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You saved his life. Whatever you did out there, fighting off that snake, you bought him the time he needed. That matters." "He saved my life more times than I can count," Jake said quietly. It was my turn. She studied him for a moment, taking in the short haircut, the controlled posture, the way he held himself despite the trembling in his hands. "Military?" "Yeah. Both of you?" 3 tours together, Afghanistan and Syria." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "That explains the bond, and why you knew to check his gums for shock." She turned back to Ranger, adjusting the oxygen flow. "He's sedated now, so he's not in pain. Why don't you go clean up? There's a bathroom down the hall. I'll stay with him." Jake didn't want to leave, but he looked down at his hands and realized she was right. He looked like he'd just walked off a battlefield. He nodded and headed for the bathroom. In the harsh fluorescent light, he barely recognized himself in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes wild. Blood covered his hands, his forearms soaked into his tactical uniform. The camouflage pattern was designed to hide a soldier in combat zones. It wasn't designed to hide this, the evidence of a fight he'd almost lost. He looked down at the uniform, at the blood, and for a moment he was back in Afghanistan, washing insurgent blood off his hands after a close-quarters fight. Different enemy, same terror. Some of it was the pythons, some was rangers. He wasn't sure if any was his own. He turned on the water and began to wash, watching the blood spiral down the drain. His hands were still shaking. He braced himself on the sink, lowering his head, and took several deep breaths. In Afghanistan, when things had gone bad, when the bullets were flying and the bombs were going off, Jake had been able to stay calm. Ice cold. It was afterward, when the dust settled, that the fear would hit him. This felt the same. When he returned to the exam room, Dr. Chen was sitting on a stool beside Ranger, one hand resting gently on the dog's head. She looked up when Jake entered. "He's resting comfortably. I'm going to move him to our ICU in a few minutes." She paused. "Can I ask you something? You said python attack. Where exactly did this happen?" "Riverside Park. Main trail, about half a mile in, near the pine grove." Her expression darkened. "That's the third one." Jake's head snapped up. "Third what?" "Third python attack in Fayetteville in the past 6 weeks. A Labrador was killed 3 weeks ago in a backyard on the east side. A golden retriever was killed 2 weeks ago near the Cape Fear River Trail." She stood up, her arms crossed. "And now your dog in Riverside Park. That's 3 different locations, 3 different pythons. All Burmese from what animal control could determine." "Burmese pythons aren't native to North Carolina," Jake said, his mind already working through the implications. "And even if someone had them as pets, 3 escapes in 6 weeks? That's not coincidence." "No," Dr. Chen agreed. "It's not. I've reported all 3 attacks to animal control and to the police. They said they'd investigate, but I haven't heard anything. And now your dog is the 3rd victim, except he's the first to survive." She looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I think someone is releasing these snakes deliberately, and I think they're going to keep doing it until someone stops them." Jake felt something shift inside him, a gear clicking into place. For 8 months he'd been drifting, trying to figure out what to do with himself, how to live in a world where he wasn't fighting anymore. Looked like the fighting had found him anyway. He looked down at Ranger, his partner, his brother, lying sedated on the table, his ribs wrapped in bandages. "Then I guess," Jake said quietly, his voice taking on the hard edge it had carried in combat zones. "Someone needs to stop them." Dr. Chen met his eyes and saw something there that made her take a step back. Not in fear, but in recognition. She was looking at a man who'd just been given a mission. And God help whoever had hurt his dog. Detective Maria Vasquez arrived at the Fayetteville Animal Emergency Clinic 47 minutes after Dr. Sarah Chen made the call. She wasn't what Jake had expected. Most detectives he'd encountered during his years in the military had been older men, worn down by bureaucracy and bad coffee, moving through cases with the enthusiasm of someone doing their taxes. Maria Vasquez was different. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and sharp, intelligent brown eyes that assessed everything in the room within 3 seconds of walking through the door. She wore dark jeans, a burgundy blazer over a white shirt, and sensible boots. Her badge was clipped to her belt, and Jake's trained eye caught the slight bulge under her jacket that meant she was carrying. She moved with purpose, with confidence, like someone who'd earned her position rather than been given it. "Dr. Chen," she said, shaking the veterinarian's hand. "You called about another python attack?" "3rd one in 6 weeks," Dr. Chen confirmed. "This is Jake Morrison. His dog Ranger was attacked this morning at Riverside Park." Maria turned to Jake, and he saw her eyes do that quick evaluation thing that law enforcement officers did, cataloguing details. The military haircut, the way he stood, the controlled stillness. She extended her hand. "Detective Maria Vasquez, Fayetteville PD. I'm sorry about your dog. How's he doing?" Jake shook her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "He's alive. That's more than the other 2 dogs can say." Something flickered in Maria's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition of someone who didn't waste words. "Can you walk me through what happened?" For the next 15 minutes, Jake recounted the attack in precise, chronological detail. Time, location, the snake's appearance, its behavior, the fight. He spoke like he was giving a mission debrief, stripping away emotion and focusing on facts. Maria took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that told Jake she actually knew what she was doing. When he finished, Maria flipped her notebook closed and leaned against the wall, her expression grim. "Okay, here's what I know, and none of it is good news. The first attack happened 6 weeks ago, September 3rd. A 3-year-old black lab named Duke was killed in his own backyard on Bragg Boulevard. The owner, retired Army sergeant named Tom Holloway, found Duke's body in the morning. The snake was gone, but the constriction patterns were obvious. Animal control found shed python skin in the bushes." Dr. Chen nodded. "I saw the necropsy report. The injuries were consistent with a large constrictor, probably 15 to 18 feet long. Second attack was September 17th. Maria continued. "Golden retriever named Bailey, killed on the Cape Fear River Trail. Her owner, a college student named Jennifer Park, was walking her off-leash early in the morning. She heard Bailey yelp, ran to help. But by the time she got there, the snake was already wrapping around her. Jennifer tried to fight it off, but—" Maria shook her head. "She wasn't strong enough. Bailey died at the scene." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd been strong enough, barely, and he'd had combat training and a knife. A college student wouldn't have stood a chance. "And now Ranger," Maria said. "That's 3 attacks, 3 different locations, spanning about 4 square miles. All Burmese pythons, all roughly the same size range. These snakes don't belong here. They're invasive species from Southeast Asia. They can survive in Florida's climate, but North Carolina is too cold for them long term. They shouldn't be here at all, let alone 3 of them in 6 weeks." "Someone's releasing them," Jake said. It wasn't a question. "That's my working theory," Maria agreed. "But I've got a problem. I've got no witnesses except Jennifer Park, and she was too traumatized to give me much detail. I've got no physical evidence except shed snake skin, which tells me species but not much else. And I've got a captain who thinks I'm wasting time chasing exotic pets that escaped from someone's garage." "But you don't think that's what this is?" Jake said, reading her tone. "No, I don't." Maria pulled out her phone, swiping through photos. "Look at the attack locations." She showed Jake a map with 3 red pins. Bragg Boulevard on the east side, Cape Fear River Trail to the south, Riverside Park to the north. They form a rough triangle, covering different parts of the city. If these were escaped pets, they'd all come from the same source, probably somewhere in the middle. But these attacks are spread out. Different territories. Which suggests, Jake said, his mind already working through the tactical implications, that whoever's doing this is deliberately choosing different locations. They're trying to create panic across the whole city. Or testing something, Maria added, seeing which locations work best, which snakes are most effective. She put her phone away. "Here's what keeps me up at night. Burmese pythons can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over 200 pounds. They're ambush predators. They're silent, they're patient, and they're strong enough to kill an adult human if they get the right angle. So far, they've only killed dogs. But what happens when a kid gets too close? What happens when someone's grandmother is gardening and doesn't hear the snake coming? The room went quiet. Dr. Chen's face had gone pale. Jake felt a cold anger settling in his gut, the same feeling he'd had when he'd seen insurgents planting IEDs near schools. "So what's your plan?" Jake asked. "What are you doing about it?" Maria's expression turned frustrated. "Everything I can with no budget, no manpower, and a captain who thinks I'm chasing shadows. I've been coordinating with animal control, but they're overwhelmed. I've reached out to Fish and Wildlife, but exotic animal smuggling is low priority for them unless it's connected to a bigger case. I've been driving around to pet stores and exotic animal dealers, asking questions, but no one admits to selling Burmese pythons recently." "What about ownership records?" Jake asked. "Don't you need a permit to own a python that size?" "In theory, yes. North Carolina requires permits for venomous snakes and large constrictors. But enforcement is a joke. Half the exotic pet trade happens under the table, private sales, no paperwork. And even if someone did have permits, there's no law requiring them to report if their snake escapes." Jake paced the room, his mind working. This was a tactical problem, and tactical problems had solutions. You just had to find the right angle. "Okay, so we need to approach this differently. Forget the snakes for a minute. Let's talk about motive. Why would someone release pythons in a city? What do they gain?" "That's the million-dollar question," Maria said. "Could be someone with a grudge against the city. Could be an animal rights extremist trying to make a point. Could be someone who just wants to watch chaos unfold. Or," Dr. Chen said quietly, and they both turned to her, "it could be someone trying to eliminate competition." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Dr. Chen hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not an expert on the exotic pet trade, but I've treated enough illegal animals over the years to know how it works. It's a multi-billion-dollar black market. People collect rare animals as status symbols, or breed them to sell, or use them in illegal fighting operations. If someone wanted to corner the market in this region, if they wanted to scare off competitors or drive down prices by creating a crisis, releasing a few pythons to cause chaos would be a pretty effective strategy." Maria was already writing in her notebook. "That's actually not a bad theory. Create panic about dangerous exotic animals, get law enforcement to crack down on legitimate dealers, and suddenly you're the only game in town operating under the radar. But that only works if you're already in the business," Jake said. "You'd need access to the animals, connections to buyers, and enough resources to take the hit when your snakes get killed or captured. So we're looking for someone wealthy," Maria said, ticking off points on her fingers. "Someone connected to the exotic animal trade. Someone who benefits from increased regulation driving out smaller competitors. Someone who's cold enough to sacrifice expensive animals and risk public safety just to make a profit." "That's a pretty specific profile," Jake said. "Yeah," Maria agreed. "Now I just need to find them in a city of 200,000 people with no budget, no resources, and no support from my department." Jake made a decision. It wasn't a hard decision. He'd been making decisions like this his whole adult life, decisions to step into situations that weren't officially his problem, but that he couldn't walk away from. "I can help," he said. Maria looked at him skeptically. "No offense, Mr. Morrison, but this is a police investigation. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not offering to play cop." Jake interrupted. "But I've got skills that might be useful. I've got time that you don't have. And I've got motivation." He glanced at the ICU where Ranger was fighting for his life. Someone hurt my dog. I'm not going to sit on my hands and wait for it to happen to someone else. Maria studied him for a long moment. What branch were you? Army, Delta Force, 12 years. Her eyebrows went up slightly. Delta Force operators weren't common. They were the tip of the spear, the guys who did the things that never made the news. Okay, so you've got training in reconnaissance, surveillance, intelligence gathering. That's actually useful. She paused. But if you cross any lines, if you do anything that compromises my case, I'll arrest you myself. Clear? Crystal. And everything you find, you bring to me first. No vigilante justice, no lone wolf heroics. Jake nodded, though he made no promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Maria handed him a business card. My cell is on the back. Call me if you find anything. And I mean anything. A rumor, a lead, a weird conversation you overhear. This is a puzzle. And right now, we're missing most of the pieces. After Maria left, Jake sat with Ranger for another hour, watching the rise and fall of his partner's sedated breathing. Dr. Chen checked on them periodically, adjusting medications, monitoring vitals, but mostly giving Jake space. Finally, she sat down beside him. He's doing well. Better than I expected, honestly. His lung is reinflating on its own, which means we might not need surgery. If he stays stable through the night, I'll be cautiously optimistic. Thank you, Jake said, for everything. It's my job. She paused. But I'm glad Detective Vasquez is taking this seriously. Those other two dogs, Duke and Bailey, they died because no one was paying attention. No one connected the dots fast enough. That's not going to happen again, Jake said quietly. Dr. Chen looked at him. You're really going after whoever did this, aren't you? Yes. Be careful. People who traffic in exotic animals, people who'd release pythons in public spaces, they're not going to be nice people. Jake almost smiled. I've dealt with worse. After leaving the clinic with strict instructions to call if Ranger's condition changed, Jake drove home to his small rental house on the outskirts of Fayetteville. It was a simple place. 1 bedroom, sparsely furnished, the kind of temporary housing that said its occupant hadn't really settled in. He'd been telling himself for 8 months that he'd find something permanent eventually. But the truth was he hadn't figured out where he belonged yet. He showered, washing off the last of the blood, and changed into clean clothes. Then he sat down at his laptop and got to work. The first call he made was to someone he hadn't talked to in 3 years. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. This is Garrett. It's Morrison. There was a pause, then a surprised laugh. Jake Morrison, I heard you'd gotten out. How's civilian life treating you? It's complicated, Jake said. I need a favor. Marcus Garrett had been Jake's teammate for 2 tours in Afghanistan before transferring to a different unit. When he'd left the military 5 years ago, he'd taken a job with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Office of Law Enforcement. He investigated wildlife trafficking, illegal hunting, and the kind of environmental crimes that most people didn't know existed. What kind of favor? Garrett asked, his tone shifting to professional. Jake explained the situation. The 3 python attacks. The pattern. The theory about someone using the snakes to create chaos in the exotic animal trade. Garrett listened without interrupting, and when Jake finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Okay, Garrett finally said. That's not good. Burmese pythons are actually a major problem in Florida. They've destroyed the Everglades ecosystem, killed off native species, and cost millions in damage. But in North Carolina? That's unusual. They can't survive the winter here, which means someone's keeping them and releasing them deliberately. Jake said, exactly, and that's a federal crime. The Lacey Act prohibits interstate transport of certain invasive species, including Burmese pythons. If someone's bringing them into North Carolina, they're violating federal law. He paused. But here's the thing, Jake. The exotic pet trade is massive. We're talking billions of dollars globally. It's connected to organized crime, international smuggling rings, corrupt officials. It's not something you can just investigate on your own. I'm not trying to take down the entire trade, Jake said. I'm trying to find one person in Fayetteville who's releasing pythons and hurting innocent animals. Fair enough. Jake could hear typing in the background. Okay, I'm pulling up our database. Let me see what we've got on exotic animal dealers in the Fayetteville area. More typing. All right. There are 6 licensed dealers within a 50-mile radius. Most of them are small operations, selling reptiles and birds to hobbyists. But there's one name that stands out. Vincent Crowe. Jake grabbed a pen. Who's he? Billionaire real estate developer, officially. But we've had our eye on him for years. He's got a private estate outside Fayetteville, about 200 acres, heavily secured. We've received multiple tips that he keeps an illegal exotic animal collection there. Tigers, bears, primates, reptiles, the works. But we've never been able to get a warrant. He's got expensive lawyers, political connections, and he's very careful about covering his tracks. So he's untouchable, Jake said, feeling that familiar frustration he'd felt overseas when they'd known exactly who the bad guys were but couldn't act because of politics. On paper, yes. In reality, everyone's got weaknesses. You just have to find them. Garrett paused. Listen, Jake. If Crowe is behind this, you need to be careful. He's not just wealthy, he's dangerous. 3 years ago, a local journalist started investigating him, writing articles about alleged illegal animal trading. She disappeared. Just vanished. No body, no evidence, case went cold. Could be coincidence, but... But you don't believe in coincidences, Jake finished. Neither do you. Garrett's voice turned serious. I can send you what I've got on Crowe. Background, property records, known associates. But promise me you'll be smart about this. Guys like him don't play by the rules. Neither do I, Jake said quietly. After hanging up with Garrett, Jake spent the next 4 hours diving into everything he could find about Vincent Crowe. It was like doing reconnaissance on a high-value target, something he'd done dozens of times in the military. Build a profile, find the patterns, identify the vulnerabilities. Vincent Crowe was 58 years old, born into old money in Charleston, South Carolina. He'd built his fortune in real estate development, buying up land, building luxury communities, and selling them to the wealthy. He owned properties in 6 states, with his primary residence being the Crowe estate just outside Fayetteville. The estate itself was impressive in a disturbing way. Jake found aerial photos online, taken by Google Earth. It was a sprawling compound surrounded by high walls and dense forest. The main house was a modern monstrosity of glass and steel, all sharp angles and excess. Behind it were multiple outbuildings, what looked like climate-controlled structures that could be animal enclosures, and a private lake. Jake cross-referenced property records and found something interesting. Crowe had purchased the estate 12 years ago for $4 million. Since then, he'd filed permits for various construction projects, but many of the permits were vague or sealed. Private agricultural structures. Climate-controlled storage facilities. Nothing that specifically mentioned exotic animals, but nothing that ruled them out either. He dug deeper, searching for any criminal history. Crowe had been investigated multiple times, as Garrett had mentioned. Allegations of illegal animal trafficking. suspicions of money laundering, complaints from neighbors about strange noises coming from the estate at night. But nothing had ever resulted in charges. Every investigation had been quietly closed. Jake found the newspaper articles about the missing journalist. Her name was Lisa Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen as far as Jake could tell. She'd been 29, working for the Fayetteville Observer, known for her investigative work on local corruption. She'd published 3 articles about Crow's alleged illegal animal collection, each one more detailed than the last. The articles included anonymous interviews with former employees who claimed to have seen tigers, bears, and large snakes at the estate. 2 weeks after the 3rd article was published, Lisa Chen had vanished. Her car was found abandoned near the Cape Fear River. No signs of struggle. No body. The police had investigated it as a missing person case, but with no evidence of foul play, it had eventually gone cold. That had been 3 years ago. Jake sat back in his chair, processing the information. If Crow was responsible for Lisa Chen's disappearance, and if he was now releasing pythons to terrorize the city, then Jake was dealing with someone who was not just ruthless, but smart. Someone who knew how to make problems disappear, which meant Jake needed to be smarter. He pulled up a satellite map of Fayetteville and marked the 3 python attack locations. Then he added a 4th marker for Crow's estate. The estate was roughly equidistant from all 3 attack sites, about 8 to 10 miles from each location. Not proof of anything, but interesting. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Chen. Ranger's vitals are stable. He's resting comfortably. You should get some sleep. Jake texted back. Thank you. I'll be there first thing in the morning. But he didn't go to sleep. Instead, he grabbed his keys and headed for his truck. It was 11:47 p.m., late enough that the roads would be quiet, early enough that he wouldn't look suspicious if anyone saw him. He was going to do a reconnaissance of Crow's estate. Not a break-in, not a confrontation. Just a drive-by, observing, gathering information. Understanding the terrain was the first step in any operation. The drive took 30 minutes, leading him out of the city and into the wealthier suburbs where houses were measured in acres instead of square feet. Crow's estate was at the end of a long private road, marked by a massive iron gate with the letter C worked into its design. Jake drove past without slowing, his eyes cataloguing details. The wall surrounding the property was at least 10 feet high, topped with security cameras. Motion sensors were visible at regular intervals. The gate itself looked like it could stop a truck. This wasn't just security. This was a fortress. He continued down the road, found a place to turn around, and made a second pass, slower this time. Through gaps in the trees, he could see lights from the main house. He could also see what looked like floodlights illuminating some of the outbuildings behind the house. Someone was awake. As Jake drove past the gate for the second time, it suddenly began to open. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he kept his speed steady, just a normal car on a normal road. In his rearview mirror, he saw a black SUV emerge from the gate and turn in the opposite direction. Heading deeper into the countryside, Jake's instincts screamed at him. That SUV leaving Crow's estate close to midnight, heading away from the city. It could be nothing. Or it could be something. He made a quick decision. He pulled into a small service road, killed his lights, and waited. 2 minutes later, the SUV's tail lights disappeared around a curve. Jake pulled out and followed, staying far enough back that his headlights wouldn't be obvious, but close enough that he wouldn't lose them. The SUV drove for 15 minutes, going deeper into rural areas where houses became scarce and forest became thick. Finally, it turned onto an unmarked dirt road. Jake drove past, continued for half a mile, then pulled over and parked. He was still in his tactical uniform, which was actually perfect for what he was about to do. The camouflage pattern that had drawn a few stares in the park would make him invisible in the forest at night. He grabbed a small backpack from behind his seat. Inside was gear he'd kept from his military days, night vision goggles, a tactical flashlight, a knife, his Glock 19, which he was licensed to carry but hoped he wouldn't need. He also grabbed a small digital camera with a zoom lens. Then he set off on foot, moving through the forest parallel to the dirt road. This was what he'd done for 12 years, moving silently through hostile territory, being the eyes that saw without being seen. It took him 20 minutes to reach a position where he could observe. The SUV was parked in a small clearing, its headlights illuminating a structure that looked like a large shed or barn. 2 men were unloading something from the back of the vehicle, large containers like the kind used to transport animals. Jake lifted his camera and started taking photos. The men were big, wearing dark clothes, moving with efficiency. Security personnel, not random workers. One of them unlocked the barn door, and for just a moment Jake saw inside. Rows of enclosures, cages, and movement, lots of movement. This wasn't a storage shed. This was an off-site facility for keeping animals. Jake photographed everything: the license plate of the SUV, the faces of the men, the barn itself, the containers. After 20 minutes, the men finished unloading, locked the barn, and drove away. Jake waited another 30 minutes, making sure they weren't coming back, then moved closer. He circled the barn, photographing it from different angles, documenting every detail. Through gaps in the boards, he could see more enclosures, could hear the sounds of animals moving, hissing, scratching, low growls. He was about to leave when he heard something that made his blood run cold, a sound he'd heard just that morning, a python's hiss, low and sustained, coming from inside the barn. Jake felt rage surge through him, hot and primal. This was it. This was where they were keeping the snakes. This was the source. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Detective Vasquez with the GPS coordinates and a brief message. "Found something. Call me." Then he took one last look at the barn, memorizing every detail, before melting back into the forest and heading to his truck. He had his target now. Vincent Crowe was behind the python attacks. He was keeping illegal animals. And Jake was going to bring him down. But as he drove back toward the city, his phone rang. It was Dr. Chen, and her voice was tight with urgency. "Jake, you need to get to the clinic right now. Ranger's crashing. His lung collapsed. We're taking him into emergency surgery." The investigation would have to wait. His partner needed him. Jake pressed the accelerator to the floor and raced through the night. The evidence of Crowe's crimes stored safely on his camera's memory card, and the mission now doubled. Save Ranger and stop the man who'd nearly killed him. The war had officially begun. Jake made it to the clinic in 18 minutes, bursting through the doors just as Dr. Sarah Chen was scrubbing up for surgery. She looked up, her face serious but calm, and that calmness was the only thing keeping Jake from completely losing it. "He's stable enough for surgery," she said quickly, reading the panic in his eyes. "His lung collapsed about 20 minutes ago. It's not uncommon with this type of injury. We caught it early, and I'm going to put in a chest tube to re-inflate it. He's going to be okay, Jake, but I need you to trust me and stay out here." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to be in that operating room, but he knew better. Instead, he nodded tightly and stepped back. "Save him. That's the plan. Dr. Chen said, and disappeared through the surgical suite doors. For the next 90 minutes, Jake paced the waiting room like a caged animal. He couldn't sit, couldn't focus. His mind kept flashing between images of Ranger fighting the python and the barn full of cages he'd discovered hours ago. Everything was connected. Crow's illegal operation, the released pythons, Ranger fighting for his life in surgery. His phone buzzed. Detective Vasquez. "Morrison, I got your text. What did you find?" Jake lowered his voice, moving to a quiet corner of the waiting room. "An off-site facility about 20 miles outside the city. Barn, heavily secured, filled with animal enclosures. I saw 2 men from Crow's estate unloading containers, and I heard pythons, Maria. Multiple pythons inside that barn." There was a sharp intake of breath. "You went to Crow's estate? Jake, I told you. I didn't break any laws. I drove on a public road, followed a suspicious vehicle, and observed from public land. Everything I saw is admissible." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Did you get photos?" "Dozens, including license plates and faces. Send them to me, all of them. And Jake, don't go back there. If Crow's people made you, if they know someone's watching, they'll either move everything or do something worse. We need to be smart about this." "Ranger's in surgery right now because of what Crow did," Jake said, his voice hard. "Smart is the only thing keeping me from driving back there and burning that barn to the ground. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we do this by the book, or Crow walks. His lawyers will tear apart anything that even smells like vigilante justice. So please, let me do my job." Jake forced himself to breathe. She was right. He knew she was right. "Okay, I'll send you everything. But Maria, move fast. Every day we wait is another day he could release another snake." After sending the photos, Jake resumed his pacing. Another hour passed before Dr. Chen finally emerged from surgery, pulling off her surgical cap. She looked tired but satisfied. "He made it through beautifully. The chest tube is in place, his lung is re-inflating, and all his vitals are strong. He's going to need several weeks of recovery, but Jake, he's going to be fine." The relief hit Jake so hard he had to sit down. He put his face in his hands, and for just a moment allowed himself to feel the weight of the last 24 hours. Dr. Chen sat beside him, giving him space but staying close. "Can I see him?" Jake asked finally. "He's still sedated, but yes, come on." Ranger looked small on the surgical table, his chest wrapped in bandages, a tube protruding from his side connected to a drainage system. But his breathing was steady, strong, and when Jake put his hand on his head, Ranger's ear twitched in recognition, even in sleepy. "Hey, buddy," Jake whispered. "You scared me. Don't do that again." Dr. Chen checked the monitors, made some notes on a chart. "He can go home in a few days if he continues to improve. You'll need to keep him quiet, no running, no stares, no excitement. The chest tube will stay in for about a week." "I'll take care of him," Jake said. "Whatever he needs." "I know you will." Dr. Chen hesitated. "I heard you on the phone with Detective Vasquez. You found where the snakes are being kept?" Jake looked at her, measuring how much to say. But she'd fought to save Ranger's life, and she'd been the one to connect the dots about the multiple attacks. She deserved to know. "I found a facility connected to Vincent Crow. It's where he's keeping his illegal animals, including pythons. Detective Vasquez is building a case." Dr. Chen's expression turned cold. "Good. That man needs to be stopped." She paused. "Be careful, Jake. I've heard stories about Crow. People who cross him tend to have bad things happen." "So I've heard." It was 3 a.m. when Jake finally left the clinic, with promises to return later that day. He drove home on autopilot, exhausted but too wired to sleep. His phone rang as he pulled into his driveway. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him tap the accept button. Hello? Jake Morrison. The voice was male, professional, with an edge that immediately put Jake on alert. Who's asking? My name is Marcus Reed. I'm head of security for Mr. Vincent Crowe. Mr. Crowe would like to have a conversation with you about your activities tonight. Jake's blood went cold. They'd made him. Somehow, despite his training, despite his precautions, Crowe's people had identified him. I don't know what you're talking about, Jake said carefully. Mr. Morrison, let's not insult each other's intelligence. You were observed on Mr. Crowe's private road tonight, and again near one of his agricultural properties. That's trespassing and stalking. Mr. Crowe could involve the police, but he's a reasonable man. He'd prefer to handle this privately. I was driving on a public road. That's not a crime. No, but taking photographs of private property without permission could be considered an invasion of privacy. And following Mr. Crowe's employees could be considered harassment. Reed's voice remained calm, almost friendly, which somehow made it more threatening. Mr. Hyde, Crowe simply wants to understand why a former Delta Force operator is so interested in his business affairs. So they'd run his background too. This was bad. My dog was attacked by a python yesterday. I'm trying to find out where it came from. I'm very sorry to hear about your dog, but I can assure you Mr. Crowe's properties are secure. No animals have escaped from his facilities. Perhaps you should look elsewhere for your answers. Maybe I should, Jake said. Thanks for the concern. Mr. Morrison, one more thing. Mr. Crowe is a powerful man with powerful friends. He would hate for anything unfortunate to happen to you or your injured dog. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't mind their own business. I'm sure you understand. The line went dead. Jake sat in his truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. That had been a threat. Clear, direct, unmistakable. They'd threatened Ranger. He pulled out his phone and called Detective Vasquez, not caring that it was 3 a.m. This better be important. She answered groggily. Crowe's people just called me. They know I was watching them, and they threatened my dog. All traces of sleep vanished from Maria's voice. What exactly did they say? Jake recounted the conversation word for word. When he finished, Maria swore softly in Spanish. Okay, this is actually good news and bad news. Bad news, you're blown. They know you're investigating. Good news, they just made a direct threat, which is a crime. I can use that. How? It's my word against theirs. Did you record the call? No. Damn. Okay, from now on, you record everything. Every call, every conversation. And Jake, you need to be careful. Marcus Reed isn't just some security guard. I ran his name after you mentioned Crowe earlier. Reed's former military too, Marines, then private military contractor work in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's got a rep for being efficient and ruthless. If Crowe sent him to threaten you, it means they're taking you seriously. Good, Jake said flatly. They should. No, not good. Jake, listen to me. We're close to having enough for a warrant, but we're not there yet. I need more time. Can you stay away from Crowe's properties for a few days? Let things cool down? Jake wanted to say no. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to go back to that barn, to document everything, to force the confrontation. But Maria was right. If he pushed too hard too fast, Crowe would just move his operation and they'd be back to square one. Yeah, he said reluctantly. I'll stay away. Thank you. Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow. But Jake didn't rest. He spent the next 3 hours at his laptop, researching Marcus Reed and finding exactly what Maria had described. Reed was 42, former Marine Force recon, decorated combat veteran who'd left the service 12 years ago. After that, he'd worked for 3 different private military companies, operating in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several African countries. His specialty was high-risk security for wealthy clients. He'd been hired by Vincent Crowe 8 years ago and had been his head of security ever since. There were no criminal charges on his record, but there were rumors, whispers of excessive force. Allegations of witness intimidation that never went anywhere. Reed was exactly the kind of man a billionaire would hire when he needed problems to disappear quietly. Jake finally fell asleep around dawn, fully clothed on his couch, his phone clutched in his hand in case the clinic called about Ranger. He woke 4 hours later to someone knocking on his door. He grabbed his sidearm from the coffee table, a habit from years of never being unarmed, and approached the door carefully. Through the peephole, he saw a woman, late 30s, Hispanic, with long dark hair and nervous eyes. She wasn't Marcus Reed, wasn't an obvious threat, but Jake's instincts were screaming that this was important. He opened the door, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" Elena's eyes widened slightly as she took in his appearance, still in full tactical uniform, even at home. "You really are military," she said quietly. Jake just nodded. The uniform wasn't a costume. It was a statement. "I'm still in the fight. Are you Jake Morrison?" Her voice was quiet, heavily accented. "Who's asking?" "My name is Elena Rodriguez. I work for Vincent Crowe. I need to talk to you. Please. It's about the animals." Jake studied her. She looked terrified. She kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to jump out at any moment. Every instinct told him this could be a trap, but his instincts also told him her fear was genuine. He unchained the door. "Come in, quickly." Elena practically ran inside, and Jake closed and locked the door behind her. She stood in his living room, clutching a small backpack, her whole body shaking. "How did you find me?" Jake asked. "I heard Marcus on the phone last night. He was talking about you, about warning you off. I looked you up, found your address. I had to come. I had to tell someone what's happening." "What is happening?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Crowe, he collects exotic animals. It started small, a few rare birds, some reptiles. But it got worse. Now he has tigers, bears, primates, and snakes. So many snakes. I am his animal handler. It's my job to feed them, clean the enclosures, make sure they're healthy. But Mr. Crowe, he doesn't care about the animals. He only cares about collecting them, about showing them off to his rich friends." "And the pythons," Jake said quietly. "The ones being released in the city." "Does Crowe know about that?" Elena nodded miserably. "He ordered it. 3 weeks ago he got angry because the state was talking about passing stricter laws on exotic animal ownership. He said he needed to create chaos, to make the public think exotic pets were dangerous so that only people like him, with money and resources, could keep them legally. He told Marcus to release the pythons in different parts of the city." Jake felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" "Because yesterday I heard about your dog. I heard that one of the pythons hurt a military service dog, and I just—" She broke down crying. "I can't do this anymore. Those animals, they suffer in his cages. And now they're being used to hurt innocent pets, innocent people. It's wrong. All of it is wrong." "Will you testify?" Jake asked. "Will you tell the police what you just told me?" Elena looked at him with genuine terror in her eyes. If Mr. Crow finds out I talked to you, he'll kill me. Or Marcus will. I've seen what they do to people who betray them. The journalist, Jake said, the pieces clicking together. Lisa Chen, you know what happened to her. Elena's silence was answer enough. Jake pulled out his phone. I'm calling Detective Vasquez. She's good people, and she'll protect you. But Elena, if you want to stop Crow, you need to tell her everything. Everything you've seen, everything you know. Can you do that? Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Yes, for the animals. And for your dog. Yes. Detective Maria Vasquez arrived 30 minutes later, and with her came a representative from the district attorney's office. They spent 3 hours taking Elena's statement, recording every detail of Crow's operation, the illegal imports, the falsified permits, the Python releases, the threats against journalists and investigators. By the time they finished, Maria's expression was a mixture of triumph and grim determination. We've got him, she said to Jake. With Elena's testimony and your photos, we have enough for a warrant. Multiple warrants. We can hit his estate, the barn, and every property he owns. When? Jake asked. Tomorrow morning. I need to coordinate with Fish and Wildlife, Animal Control, and the state police. This is going to be big, Jake. Really big. Elena, who'd been sitting quietly throughout, spoke up. There are over 40 animals at his estate. Tigers, bears, wolves, primates, and at least 20 large snakes. You'll need experienced handlers and tranquilizers. If those animals get loose during the raid, people could die. We'll be prepared, Maria assured her. And Elena, thank you. What you did today, that took real courage. After everyone left, Jake finally allowed himself to return to the clinic to see Ranger. Jake caught his reflection in the clinic's glass doors as he entered. He was still wearing the blood-stained tactical uniform from that morning. He should have gone home and changed, but the thought hadn't even occurred to him. Dr. Chen noticed when he walked into the ICU, her eyes flicking to the dried blood on his sleeves. But she didn't comment. Maybe she understood that some uniforms you couldn't take off, even when you wanted to. His partner was awake now, groggy but alert. And the moment Jake walked into the ICU, Ranger's tail started wagging weakly. Hey, buddy, Jake said, kneeling beside the recovery cage. You feeling better? Ranger licked Jake's hand, and Dr. Chen, who'd been monitoring him, smiled. He's doing remarkably well. He's a fighter, this one. He always has been, Jake said. Dr. Chen checked Ranger's chart. Detective Vasquez called me. She said you found the people responsible. Is it really over? Tomorrow it will be, Jake said. Tomorrow we end this. And as he sat with his recovering partner, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose, direction. The mission was almost complete. Justice was almost served. All that remained was the final operation. And Jake Morrison had spent 12 years learning how to finish what he started. The raid on Vincent Crow's estate happened at dawn, just as the first light was breaking over the North Carolina pines. Jake stood in his tactical uniform, the same one he'd worn the morning Ranger was attacked. He hadn't planned it that way, but when he'd gotten dressed that morning, muscle memory had taken over. Full tactical gear, combat boots, the uniform of a man going to war. Maria had given him an approving nod when he'd arrived. You look ready, she'd said. Jake's response was simple. I am. Jake stood beside Detective Maria Vasquez in the command vehicle, watching multiple agencies converge on the property like a well-orchestrated military operation. FBI, Fish and Wildlife, State Police, Animal Control with specialized rescue teams. Over 60 officers, all moving with synchronized precision. All units, Execute! Maria's voice crackled over the radio. The gates came down with a battering ram. Officers poured through like a flood, fanning out across the sprawling estate with tactical efficiency. Jake wasn't officially part of the raid. He was still a civilian, but Maria had made him a consultant, which meant he got to watch justice unfold. The estate was everything Elena had described and worse. In climate-controlled buildings behind the mansion, they found Bengal tigers pacing in cages barely large enough to turn around, black bears in concrete pits, primates chained to walls. And in one massive temperature-controlled facility, 23 pythons, including 3 Burmese pythons that match the size of the ones used in the attacks. Vincent Crowe was arrested in his study, surrounded by his expensive lawyers who were already making calls. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The animals were living proof of violations. Elena's testimony was devastating. And Jake's photographs tied Crowe directly to the off-site facility where the attack pythons had been kept. Marcus Reed was arrested trying to destroy computer files. Those files, recovered by FBI cyber forensics, contained shipping manifests showing illegal imports from Southeast Asia, payment records to smugglers, and most damning of all, text messages between Crowe and Reed explicitly discussing the Python releases. Make it messy. Make it public. Make people afraid. One message read. It was dated 2 days before the first attack. The trial took 6 months. Jake attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Ranger at his side. His partner had made a full recovery, though he still wore his service dog vest with pride. Dr. Sarah Chen often sat beside them, and somewhere along the way the conversations over coffee had turned into dinners, and the dinners had turned into something more. Vincent Crowe was convicted on 47 counts, including animal cruelty, illegal trafficking, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Marcus Reed got 20 years for his role in the operation. The animals were all rescued and relocated to proper sanctuaries. The pythons were sent to educational facilities where they'd never hurt anyone again. Standing outside the courthouse after the verdict, Jake scratched Ranger behind the ears. Jake stood outside the courthouse in his dress uniform, not the tactical camo, but the formal army service uniform he'd worn to receive his commendations. He'd wanted Crowe to see him one last time, not as a concerned dog owner, but as the soldier who'd brought him down. Ranger sat proudly beside him, and for the first time in 8 months, Jake felt like the uniform fit again. The dog looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, and Jake knew exactly what he was thinking. They'd done it. Together. Like they always did. You know what? Dr. Sarah Chen said, slipping her hand into Jake's. I think you two finally found your mission. Jake looked at Ranger, then at Sarah, then at the courthouse where justice had been served. Yeah, he said quietly. I think we did. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some battles need to be won. And sometimes the mission you didn't know you needed becomes the one that saves you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that one person with courage can make a difference, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, justice, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and the animals who love us unconditionally. Type Amen if you believe that heroes walk among us, that loyalty is sacred, and that love, in all its forms, is the greatest force in the world. Thank you for listening. Be kind, be brave, and never stop fighting for what's right. God bless you all.